The next story is called Doctor's Orders. We had a family medical practice, one physician owner. They had several practitioners generating revenue for the business, had a great admin staff. The doctor only came in about 2.5 days per week, and he was ready to retire. He originally felt it could not be sold. He wasn't sure who would want to buy his business, so he didn't see anyone else buying it. So we encouraged him to consider it and prepare for his exit. It was a healthy business. We knew there could be many buyers interested in a business like his, from consolidators to individuals. So, Joe, you want to take it from here?
Right out of the gate, we had great interest. To his surprise, we were fielding calls left and right. We had several interviews. And as we talked about before, with those interviews comes the beginning of seller's fatigue. And he had it. But we ended up meeting a consolidator who we would consider to be a strategic buyer. It's not unusual for an aggregator to build a model where they buy up businesses, in this case, a physician practice, where they would aggregate them and ultimately put them under a similar brand. So they were buying up these physician practices. They were putting better marketing tools into them. They had large contract with vendors. They would house all of the administrative work in one location. So there was a great amount of expense savings to be had. And as I said, it would eventually lead to a single brand. This particular group was backed by an investment group who was raising funds, not only for this purchase, but for others. And even though we had an LOI in place, we also insisted on an exclusivity fee to take it off the market. They agreed and everything seemed great. However, the investment group ended up not agreeing to paying the escrow until they had received SEC certification to raise additional funds. They didn't want to put at risk the certification by paying escrow and looking like they were spending money before they had the certification to do so. We kept on getting promises that it would happen every day for weeks. So we faced a dilemma. We wanted to get the process working, and we had a mountain of due diligence that we could get moving on, or we could wait. So we decided to put together the due diligence in good faith, and we had most of it put together. Then the buyer started asking for more and more information. It got into the personnel, it got into marketing surveys, and the doctor started to get impatient because we were still waiting for this exclusivity fee. That was his expectation. And at this point, he was requiring that the money be paid. But the buyer who was telling us that we had this SEC complication really couldn't understand why we didn't get it. We were already in the process of due diligence. Why did we not just continue? And on the other hand, the doctor thought that they were not being transparent. So both parties were getting frustrated. Eventually, the SEC certification went through and the escrow exclusivity amount was paid. This is when the two parties got together. They visited the location. They got along great. They were telling stories. It was like they fell in love. You know, they had this engagement. And now they were going to get married. They just couldn't understand why there was all this animosity. And then one day, the seller comes to me and he says that, we've talked, the buyer and we get along so great. I want to handle all the communication from now on because it's just going so well. And we're going to close in 6 weeks. So I'll keep you posted. We're going through the paperwork. Let's just do it that way. So I was being apprised of this, and I saw the emails going back and forth between the parties. They could not finalize the agreement, and primarily because the doctor now decided that it was worth more, way beyond what we had initially negotiated. Finally, months later, I get an email from the buyer asking to return the escrow. They didn't end up negotiating the deal, and the buyer just walked away.
There you have it. Sounds like the seller had an expectation bias and that the buyers had not fully disclosed their situation. The seller tried to go it alone and the deal ultimately